of the TACOS day. My name is Edmund Lee, and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Manager at English Heritage, part of the capacity building team, which exists to try and develop the skills and professional attitudes that are necessary to undertake all sorts of heritage work. And that's the topic that we'll be looking at in this next session, which I'm just going to introduce briefly. Skills development. I've given it a subtitle of the human dimension. I think that follows on very much from what Victoria left us with at the end of the previous session. Before we dive into that, there's two housekeeping announcements. For those using the Etherpads, we're finding that the groups are too small to generate useful sort of conversation. So we'd like to move everybody onto one shared open space. The link for it is written on the whiteboard on that side of the room. So it's the same opening part of the address, tacos.etherpad.mozilla.org, then / Lake House. Now, is that capital L, capital H?
Yeah, it's sensitive.
Yeah, so capital L, capital H, but all one word, Lake House.
You should be able to just change it in the address bar and it should work.
The other thing for those who aren't using Etherpads, but who wish to follow on the sort of knowledge exchange transfer sort of approach, your badges have 3 digits on the back. For this second session, ideally you should be based on the table equating to the second digit on your badge. So I moved, for example, from table 2 to table 6, which equates to the table numbers are on the tables. Has everybody moved? Does everybody want a moment to move? Yeah, oh, that's great. You're very good. You're very good. Like I say, I'm the Knowledge Transfer Manager, and as Jill said, I was partly instrumental in setting up this event. And what in the capacity building team in English Heritage we're particularly keen to do is to learn from this event, not just about TACOS and the subject matter, but also how to run this sort of event in future. So any feedback you have, positive or, shall we say, developmental, about how this has been organised, the technology we're using, the approaches, the ways of mixing up groups and so on, do get in touch. You can either do it publicly, or if you've got very good eyesight, which my email address is at the bottom, but that's just edmund.lee at the usual englishheritage.org.uk address. Okay. So very briefly then to introduce the skills development aspects of TACOS. I should also say that the speakers, the list of speakers, unfortunately we aren't able to have Julian with us today. So I will just be introducing Kenneth in a moment, who will be giving us information from a report that his consultancy, Landward Research, developed for English Heritage last year on the skills gaps in the sector. I will then talk a little bit about professional skills development, various other topics. So, just to introduce that, a show of hands, please, for those in the room, and if you're online, I'm sorry, but you can always tweet it. Let's see, how many of you graduated before 1994? Okay. And don't be embarrassed, how many of you graduated before 1984? Okay. Well, that's actually pretty much in line with the profile of our profession. What I'm getting at here is that the skills to manage information are very new. Out of the existing workforce in 2013, 57% graduated before the introduction of the Netscape browser, which was one of the most popular web browsers in the mid-90s. And a quarter of us graduated, and I'm just about in that bracket myself, so graduated before the introduction of the personal computer. So, let's bear that in mind when we're thinking about the skills that we need in the sector. They are very new skills, so there are gaps not just in those coming through the new generation, but also those existing, those of us already in the workforce. Let's give some thought to that as well. I think that's all I want to say, by way of providing an introduction, these are the questions that we'll look at when we get to the discussion time, and I'll show those again on the screen in a moment. Now, I think I will come back to you in a little while, but then first I would like to introduce Kenny Aitchison, and we will hear about the skills gaps in the sector. One piece of technology which will remain from last time is the 5 minutes and stop information which Martin was using earlier on. So.
Okay, so you're using the traditional analog 5 minutes and stop.
The traditional analog open source, though.
Open source, good. That's good. I like that a lot. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Ed. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kenneth Aitchison. My company is Landward Research Limited. We do quite a lot of work looking at skills issues. We're particularly interested in issues relating to capacity, finding out about organisations and sectors, what they have and then what they need about building capacity. We do work in archaeology, but in broader cultural heritage as well. Okay, thinking about those things, thinking about why it is important to be thinking about what skills people have, thinking about why it is important, why the potentially dull statistics I'm about to show you are in fact important, is the idea that and I'm very strong believer to the principles set out by UN Development Programme, thinking about building capacity. To build capacity for a sector or for a country or for a group or for an organisation, there is a real process that it's really about. First of all, it's identifying what capacity you already have, measure the capacity that there is just now, then design a plan to improve capacity, in whatever sense this might be, deliver that plan, and then measure again to see where you are afterwards. So a lot of what we do is at the measuring capacity end. We're not exclusively about measuring capacity, but we are very interested in measuring capacity and develop methodologies that have been applied first and foremost in archaeology, but in other sectors as well, to measure the capacity of the sector. And measuring capacity is not just about head counts. Head counts is useful, but capacity is actually about what those people can do. And a brief pedant's point. This is not a presentation about skills gaps, as it has been previously advertised. A skills gap is very specifically a phrase that I would use to describe something an organisation doesn't have, something that the staff of an organisation don't have but need. A skills shortage is something different. A skills shortage is when it's something that an organisation can't get in, doesn't have the people to do that. Skills gaps are addressed by, historically, skills gaps are addressed by training the people you have, and a skills shortage by bringing in new people. And that might be by hiring new people, or it might be by getting in outsiders, subcontractors. So that's why this presentation, its title was about skills issues rather than skills gaps. Skills issues incorporating skills gaps, of course. Right, pedant point aside. Thinking now about archaeology and the data that we have. Archaeology, Labour Market Intelligence, Profiling Profession 2012-13. This is actually the fourth in a series of exercises that were about getting snapshot pictures of who was working in professional archaeology. And so these have been undertaken at 5-year intervals going back to 97, 98. And this is the cover of the most recent edition. This has been about getting information on how many people work in archaeology. Sure, there is a head count element to it, but For today's purposes, it's much more about thinking about skills issues. And for today's purposes, we're thinking much more about information technology and data management skills issues. Okay. Across this survey, where we basically tried to contact every employer or potential employer of archaeologists in the UK, we asked the employers about their skills issues. Now this is methodologically quite important because we're leaving a lot of decisions down to the employers, to the people running the businesses. Sometimes these people either they can't see the water they're swimming in, they can't see the problems that are so close to them, or they choose not to report them. But we just have to accept this as being the best possible data sets we can get. So we presented them with a range of skills areas. A lot of them were quite technical and quite archaeological, and a set of them were more about generic transferable professional skills. And we asked them about whether they had, what kind of issues they were having with these skills. Are you having to train your staff? Are you having to bring in subcontractors? Okay. Have you lost skills in this area in the last year, last 5 years? So issues then get flagged up in the report as being significant if more than 25% of respondents said, yep, we have to train people in this area. See, there's the thing. Saying that we will train people in an area actually flags it up as an issue because clearly they need those skills. It's a skills gap. And serious if more than 50% of respondents said this is going on. Difficult to break it down really because we tried to speak to every archaeological employer in the land. That includes contractors, consultants, museums, university archaeology departments. So it's a wide range of organisations. In terms of IT, which was just, and now of course this is set at such a high ungranulated level of IT skills. Do you train your people in IT skills? Do you need to get in someone with IT skills? We couldn't really break it down more specifically than that. Yeah, it's a skills gap. A third of organisations want to train their staff to improve up in-house IT skills, and a quarter of them have to buy in outside skills. We also asked about data management, which was reported as being not quite such a skills gap and certainly not quite such a skills shortage. People weren't being bought in to do the data management. But remember that this is trying to speak to every single archaeological employer in the land. And so some of them might not be thinking about data management in the way that this room thinks about data management. The change over time figures, I think, are very interesting. Now, we didn't ask about data management in previous iterations of the survey. We did 5 years ago and we did 10 years ago. The skills gap, the proportion of organisations reporting a skills gap, so that means they need to train their staff in information technology or ICT, has been falling over these 10 years. So it is still a pretty big deal, but it is not such a horrendous, overwhelming deal as it was 10 years ago. I think that is an interesting point that you may wish to discuss further. And the same goes for skills shortages. 10 years ago, 2/3 of firms were having to buy people in to do their IT for them. Not so much now. To put this more in context, here's another sector that I've done a very similar exercise for, the conservation. And this is conservation in the sense of the work of conservators, people treating individual portable pieces of heritage or art and thinking about their IT issues. They have a different set of problems. These are not just problems about knowing how to use information technology. They are reporting problems in how to conserve digital material, which I think is interesting. These are serious skills gaps. They have problems about interventive conservation, actually getting to grips with material and trying to conserve digital material. preventive conservation, setting up an environment so that the material will not need so much interventive work, and scientific or analytical services. Conserving digital material is a big issue. They also, like in archaeology, have skills gaps in just the professional skills of IT. So that this is about people working for organizations providing conservation have IT skills issues. Conservation is a different world from archaeology. It really is. The conservators are, I can confidently say, more technologically averse than the archaeological community. The Conservation Register, which is an online list of businesses providing professional conservation services that are run by accredited conservators, a bit like the IFA registered organisations list. There. Earlier this year, 241 practices, 3/4 of them don't even have their own websites. I think this is, sorry Doug, I keep walking away from the camera. All of this is a sector that doesn't even engage with IT on such a basic level. And the idea then about thinking about all their other IT and data management issues is just compounded out of that. For comparison, I think there were 71 organisations on the IFA register when I looked at this, and 70 of them had their own websites, and the one that didn't was Essex CC Field Unit, because it was in the process of closing down and becoming part of UCL unit, Archaeology South East. So, conservation has a different attitude. And again, comparing across broader sector, this is a different report that I contributed towards that was basically written by TBR for creative and cultural skills were the primary client, but English Heritage were also a client. And this was looking at skills issues across broader cultural heritage. This is not just about archaeology or conservation, but this is about historic buildings, this is about museums, this is about running visitor attractions, and a little bit, at a late stage, it changed from being called skills needs in cultural heritage to being about historic environment and cultural heritage. And IT and digital skills were being flagged up in that across the broad range of cultural heritage. For archaeology, they identified that 10% of organisations thought that skills were lacking among new entrants to the sector, which was interesting. 10% is less than the 13% that was reported across the whole of cultural heritage. And IT and technical support, things were phrased differently. So that's thinking that there were skills gaps, skills issues there. But this report was written for creative and cultural skills. This report is written in a particular language that suits that client. When this report thought about IT and digital issues, this was very specifically the kind of areas they were talking about being problems. Their IT issues were about social media, web optimization, website management, design. These were about the outward-facing aspects of IT. This was not, they weren't flagging up the issues about running a business and data management. There's your perception across broader cultural heritage about what IT issues are. For a lot of these people, the kind of things that we spoke about in the first session would just be alien. So, just to the last couple of slides that are really, I don't know how much I have to say about things, but these are about helping provoke your discussions. Training in the past, thinking about how did those that went before us get our training. This comes back to the ongoing and traditional question, the paradigm that says commercial archaeology doesn't think the universities are training their students appropriately to become graduates that can work for them. and the universities don't think it's their job to train people in these technical issues. The university think it is their job to train people to be able to think and understand and analytically understand human life in the past. It is to gain transferable skills through the medium of a degree in archaeology, to gain life skills. But really it's about thinking about human life in the past. This has been the model for training in the past, and this has not been a model that has well suited incorporating IT and data management skills into the skill sets that people have when they enter the workforce. And then thinking about the future, I would like to think that in a lovely, wonderful world where we think more on the concepts of, let's not just think about training, think about human capital. Human capital is more than just a trained person. This comes back to issues about capacity and an organization having capacity to do things, being things that are within its reach. Not quite the same as capability. We can't do any more of this. It's about being able to do. And building capacity through building capital. I like the idea that it is much more a responsibility for individuals. It is the responsibility of an individual to build their own personal capital, to build their own skills, to be very economic about this. The more they build their skills, the better they are able to go out into the world and make their way in the world. And to make their way is to make their financial way in the world. To have the skills that get them the jobs that they want. This job that you want doesn't necessarily mean it's the highest paying job. It's the job that you want for whatever reasons, and you need the skills for that job. So, in terms of thinking about gaining capacity, organizations and individuals, I think, should in the future be thinking about focusing on building what individuals are able to do rather than a focus on the traditional. Traditionally it's not about what they do, it's about the training course they have done. To focus on the other way around, to focus on what people can do, I think is the way that the sector, I think that every sector should be thinking. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. We'll have an extended period for discussion, obviously with Julian not being able to join us. So I'm give that a little bit of thought during my talk, and we can maybe take a few direct questions to myself and Kenny at the end, if Kenny is willing, or indeed you may just want either an extended period to discuss this topic, or you just may want to get to lunch earlier. So we'll be open to suggestions along those things in a few minutes. So back to where I left you. These are the questions we'll come back to at the end. I'll show you the slide at the end. But for those of you who are online, that online question we're giving priority to is where did you get your information management skills from? Think about your own experience. I found this a very useful exercise a few years ago when I wrote a sort of little sort of potted autobiography in IT, which I called I remember when all this was green screens, which I thought was quite clever. And that went back to the 1970s when I was thinking about, well, I was using computer games. And what I learned from that was by controlling something on this little controller in my hand, I could make something change on the television screen. And that's a sort of breakthrough moment. And so what I did was I went through those sort of moments in my own sort of previous work. And it is very interesting to sort of reflect on where I actually got those skills from. Some of it is through training courses, and Kenny sort of mentioned those. But some of it is more you just follow up things which interest you. So, and that might be what we need. But is that adequate? These are the things we can discuss. So, also in this session, we're inviting you all to choose your own questions as well. We've given you 3, but these are just there to start the discussion. So if you think, well, the question we really need to answer is ... then by all means write that down, put it on the ether pads, we'll come to it later. So what skills? This sort of tag cloud was created at the first meeting of the Information Management Special Interest Group in 2010. And it was just an attempt to capture what are those things that interest the people who actually attended at that meeting. So there's, it's the point I'm trying to make is it's a rag bag of things. So we've got everything from websites to databases to communication to archives to cake, if you can see that in the top right-hand corner. We're not going to progress that one. But it's a rag bag of skills. So maybe what we're needing at this point is some kind of structure, some kind of, can you use the word granularity, in trying to understand what it is that our skills requirements are. And of course the good message for us today to ponder is that we're not alone in doing this. This is an issue for the whole of society. So there are, amongst others, I'll just briefly look at professional associations, what central government are doing, and what qualifications infrastructure that currently exists, which might be able to help us. So let's learn the lessons about learning the lessons. So this is just taken from the website of Silip, which is the Chartered Institute of Librarian and Information Professionals. We have a chartered member in the room today, so did I get that right?
Almost.
Oh, well.
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay. And what they're trying to do, or what they have done for their membership, is create a very detailed map of the skills that you need to be chartered within this institute or to develop yourself as a professional. And what I've got on the screen here is just the high-level headings that you use. So organising knowledge and information management, well, you can read them yourself. The point I'm making is it's a breadth of information. And I think it's only, well, let me see. Yes, it's only right down at the last bullet point that you actually get IT showing up, which is interesting. So, and I think it's important to bear in mind, the point that we're getting from here is that the breadth of skills which are required to manage information in its broadest sense. So that's a professional association. There are others. The British Computer Society does a similar thing for those who have a more hardware sort of based sort of career. The central government obviously wants to develop its own civil servants in these areas, and there is a what should we call it? A sort of special interest group, as it were, tasked within the Cabinet Office with developing the digital skills of the civil service. So we can learn from some of the things that they're putting online. So, for example, this is again from the website where they portray what the roles are. And apologies for the sort of fuzzy image, but we've got things in the sort of core roles, so things like taxonomy, information architecture, records management, records reviewers, knowledge managers, information rights officers. And then sort of the more related skills are things like web managers, researchers, analysts, data sharing experts, and so on. So another sort of source of inspiration for us. Again, another fuzzy logo. Apologies for the, just sort of taking this straight off their website. National Occupational Standards. This is one which I've got a particular interest in. I think it may be part of the solution for us. The National Occupational Standards is a very, very broad range of documents which define for a very wide range of professions what it is that you need to know if you're going to be competent in that profession. And they underpin a whole range of what I referred to on my earlier slide as the infrastructure. So they are not a qualification in themselves, but you can use them to design a qualification. And you can use them for a number of other things as well. But a prime motivation is that things such as any kind of work-based learning can be based around a national occupational standard if it's the right standard for your profession. And as I said, a very, very broad range. What I'm trying to do here is, this is taken from the website of the where you can go to search all of the National Occupational Standards documents. They're all online. I will tweet or make a link available. But this is, if I did a search on that database for information management, and this is the whole range of different professions, types of jobs and so on that people might have a requirement for information management expertise, which is captured in a relevant national occupational standard. Now, printing machine minders and assistants, engineering service technicians and so on, huge numbers. Fortunately, yes, I say, this is the professions including information management. Fortunately, again, creative and cultural skills have put effort into developing NOS specifically to archaeological practice. And again, I'm just running a search on their database for Archaeological Information Archive, brings up a number of specific documents which define what it is if you're going to develop procedures for the use of archaeology information systems, or disseminate, deposit and archive data on the material, and it goes on to say, remains of human societies. What it is you need to know to be, as it were, competent in those areas. And then an organisation such as the IFA can then build a qualification around that standard. So there's a lot of useful structure out there. Just to go into a little bit more detail about what you find if you search for archaeology in that area, archaeological information management. Each of these documents, they're all downloaded all as a PDF, is a unit. It's the sort of basic sort of structure of a national occupational standard. And so there are units covering these topics. So just one thing to think about, I mean, and I'm just throwing this out there, immediate response to Kenny's presentation. Maybe this gives us the granularity, the sort of the topic headings that we could use to analyse skills shortages under. Just one possible thought. So you have developed procedures for the use of archaeological information systems, develop information systems themselves to meet users' needs, and then classify, compile, maintain data on the material remains intangible heritage, and then final two, provide information and disseminate, deposit and archive data. So a useful structure. Each of those documents, like I say, it runs through about sort of 2 to 3 sides of A4, a bulleted list of, these are the things you need to know, and this is the key knowledge that you need to have. So potentially very useful. Just to illustrate how these might be applied, we've spoken already about the need for collaboration in what we do. And that's something which maybe, as think about the whole heritage sector. On the left of this diagram, I have a little blue arrow reaching out to other sectors. Victoria mentioned archivists, but more broadly, it could be web designers. But if you have a structure for your skills, you've got a terminology, you've got a way of exchanging information and talking to these other sectors. So I think that's particularly the fact that NOS, the National Occupational Standards, have such a broad reach. This possibly gives us a useful way to start to collaborate on the skills we need. But it's also an organisational issue for each of us as organisations within the sector. We need to think about how skills development can support not just acquiring qualifications, but we can use them for recruitment. If you want to write a job description, well, the National Occupational Standard, that could give you a ready-made one there for you. If you want to manage somebody's performance as a line manager, it gives you a ready-made specification. And then as an individual, and Kenny made the extremely relevant point, and I'm very glad he made that point because we haven't collaborated on our slides at all, but I was very pleased that my finding is the responsibility of the individual to pay attention to their career development, seek recognition for the skills that they have, and going back to what I said right at the beginning, I acquired my skills through a pretty random process. I have absolutely nothing to document that, really. If I wanted to apply for a job in another sector, all I could say, well, yeah, I'm quite good with computers, but I've got nothing I can show them. So if you want your continuing professional development, your career development, again, there's a valid structure which we might be able to use. And this is just an example. This is taken from a presentation, I think it's by CC Skills, so I've grabbed this slide off them. This is just using a national occupational standard, one of these lists of the competencies you need in a continuing professional development context. So you choose a task which interests you. You identify the relevant standard. You plan the task based around the definition, and you use the standard as a checklist. And then when you're finished, you have a ready-made structure to evaluate your performance. So that's a practical example. As I said in the earlier slide, there's different places where it could be used as well. But so the pitch I'm making is I think that this may be part of the solution. But of course, that all relies on getting the national occupational standards right for our sector. And then building, if we want to build qualifications, we build qualifications, or embedding activities such as this, using the standards in our day-to-day work. It's the final slide, if I remember rightly. I think this is my final slide. It's just to emphasise again, this is more than just a technical skill. This is a bulleted list from a report produced by the Financial Times and a training consultancy on the evolving value of information management. So why is information management as a society, at a social level, why is this important? And what do those who think of themselves as information managers need to do? And those are the 5 key points which I think are probably worth bearing in mind. We have got to communicate our value to those who don't necessarily see the value of information and information management. We need to understand the drivers of change. What are the influences on the organisations and the sectors that we work in? How can we, as those who work with information, progress those objectives? We've got to manage processes. We've got to keep up on our technical skills. And the bottom line is we've got to provide decision-ready information. So information and knowledge all becomes real when it leads on to action. And that's the thought that I think I'd like to leave you with. Thank you. So I'll leave the questions up now. We actually have an hour until our scheduled lunch break. Sarah, is that correct? Yep. So are there any sort of immediate questions? Shall we start there? Yes.
I was just thinking, I'm not sure if it's strictly covered in this, but given the massive shrinking in the public sector, more and more of the information is going to be, well certainly I think, from what I've seen, is being carried out in the voluntary sector or in partnership with the voluntary sector.
Yes.
Does anybody think about how you develop skills for the voluntary sector and whose responsibility that is? Is it our responsibility? How would we even do that? I mean, it's something I think we should consider because increasingly we're finding that our information is coming from voluntary projects and volunteers working.
Yes.
So
yeah, I agree entirely.
How we go about doing that.
I think that is, I would say that's a very good question. I'm just sort of answering off the cuff. I'd say that yes, the same sort of skill sets are just as important whether you're working in a voluntary capacity or a professional capacity. Obviously, you may not have the same access to ways to develop yourself if you're not being paid and you're not in a contractual arrangement with an employer. So you may not have the opportunities, but in terms of identifying what skills you need, I think Kenny made the point. It's not the job that's best paid; it's the job that you want, and that might be a volunteer post. Your motivation might be that you want to take part as a volunteer in heritage. That's not really helping very much, but that's some immediate thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I was also thinking about it's quite important for us that we get information that's useful and sensible, and we're more likely to get that if we've got volunteers who have the right skills.
Yeah.
I suppose it was just how much responsibility we have to take for that.
Yes. Yes, there's 2 questions. Sorry. Yes.
On behalf of the Occupational Archaeology, we've been running a programme funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund for the past 3 years, Community Offering Universities programme, where we've trained 51 individuals, effectively as community archaeology facilitators who will be have been and will continue to do, support the voluntary sector. And one of the big things is actually in terms of standards, in supporting volunteers in developing their skills and making sure they're doing what the professional standards are that we follow, so that their work can be useful, whether it's good contributions to the HER, or whether it's a rapid project, but it's supporting them in terms of getting the best products from them, if you like. That's just one side of it. We're also
Yeah.
funding for English Heritage and CADI
Yes.
to run further training programs with voluntary sector. So
Yeah.
that's a start.
Yes, and I think it's a matter of if we're going to bring those who work for us or with us as volunteers, we want to give them the skills. We need to build that into the projects that we design, so that resourcing for that project can be part of that can be devoted to their development as well. Does that sort of capture what you're sort of getting at? Okay. Another question.
Yeah, question for Kenny. Thank you. Those numbers are fascinating and have led to a whole bunch of questions that I would like to ask. But I suppose the thing that was most unexpected to me was this like evident and very significant decline in demand for IT skills. Two question for you. So one is, do you have any notion at all about whether that's people looking for a general base level of understanding of IT, power users, or if you like, kind of technical architects and so on? And secondly, do you have a sense of, is that number because universities or just life training, if you will, people using the web much more, means that people have these days a general base level which is sufficient, or is this some kind of glut where we've actually trained, now that every HER has a tech person, that we're going to find ourselves in 5 years not, actually training people for jobs for which there's little demand? Is there any
Before Kenny answers that, could I just briefly summarise the question for those who aren't in the room, so that they can sort of... So the issue is a question for Kenny to comment on the fall off in the identified skills shortages in the archaeology sector, and maybe where that's what the factors are that's affecting that change. And Kenny, perhaps I could ask you to come up and yeah.
Yeah, good question. Now, of course, those stats don't necessarily represent a reduction in demand for the skills. They represent the organisations not needing to train their staff in the skills, because maybe the staff have the skills, because maybe they have, as you suggest, recruited people whose everyday life skills involve these things. It's... I can never remember. It's in the final Hitchhiker's Guidebook, the one not written by Douglas Adams, that says that any technology developed before the age of year 15 means it's always been there. There is no world without this technology. If it's developed between the age of 15 and 30, then this is how I will make my millions. And if it's developed after the age of 30, then it's not relevant. It doesn't affect me. I'm not interested. What is this hashtag to which you refer? And so, yes, I mean, there's the data from 10 years ago, and think about the kind of people that have come into the archaeological workforce in those 10 years. A lot more of them have a lot more suitable skills without that having been specifically part of their job training. Your second bit about the detail of which kind of issues that are, I'm afraid I can't answer that. Can't tell you precisely whose particular skills this is referring to, because we just couldn't break it down to that level of detail.
We've got another question from Keith over there. Or
nobody else?
Doug, is there a question from that table? You. Hughes.
Okay. I was interested in the data management skills that came up, because I think that's something that I may have to turn to again when the time comes, because it's something we're looking at within our teams. And certainly, I think that the ADS might very well echo this, that those skills aren't there. It's just people don't know they need them. And yeah. I think it's interesting that so many of at the management level don't seem to realize the degree to which they do need them, because when it comes time to archive those data sets, they are going to need those data management skills, and they're going to wish they had them a lot sooner, because they're going to have a monumental task of retrospectively adding metadata and documenting what they've done, which is a learning process in and of itself, and so they will definitely acquire those data skills as they go. But yeah, I think that's an area that maybe we need to work on emphasizing the value of, because it struck me that isn't being that they're not aware of it, and that's also what the back channel on Twitter seems to say as well.
Yeah, and I think that's good to flag that up, because the data don't make enough of a deal of it. And I think that might be partly coming back to the issue of the people we asked, is there a problem? We're just not aware of it. That the question is being asked of chief executives who just have no concept that this is actually something that their business needs. So they're not going to put any effort into making it something that their business needs. And so yes, I think data management is a much bigger deal than that little 9% number said.
And just to comment for those who may not be aware, Hugh, who just asked the question, is now the chair of the Information Management Special Interest Group. And part of the solution, I guess, may be coming forward in the 2-year plan, which IMSIG will be developing as a IFA, Special Interest Group. So it's another way that we have to sort of develop some of these ideas. Sorry to dump that on you, Hugh. We have a roving microphone now, so Catherine.
I think by dint of just being close to the microphone, I got in there, sorry. Just to really follow up on what Hugh said, I absolutely agree that the specific issue about data management and archiving is a peculiarly large skills gap. But I think we're at a stage where actually what we shouldn't forget is the very interesting side that Ed had up about where IT sits in the information management hierarchy of skills that you need. And I suppose we could look at it as a challenge or an opportunity. This at the moment in terms of looking at data archiving for archaeology, we mustn't forget the word archive and the fact that we have a long tradition in this country and indeed in Europe and the world of archiving things very well and properly. This isn't just about digital stuff. That we need to bear in mind all those things that archivists are very good at, which is information management, records management, Data Protection Act, Freedom of Information Act, all the legalities that go with that. That it's a combination of soft skills and techie skills that we really need to be thinking about. And so I suppose my message is, let's not think about these things in isolation.
Thank you, Catherine. And there was a comment at next time.
I think I was just wanting more clarification when you showed up the slide about from ICON and the Conservation Institute, you had conservation of digital media, and I wondered if you could just expand a bit about what the digital media was referring to.
Good question from an organisation that is on the Conservation Register. It didn't specify. It probably didn't specify. It was still trying not to over-specify, but it just didn't specify in too much detail. That is about the process of conservation. The question was set out basically by different material types. It asked about whether there's need for skills in conserving ceramics, in textiles, in paper. Digital media was identified as one of these material groups. So that it was presented in that way. It asking about, do you train your staff to do interventive conservation of digital media? And I think an awful lot of conservators, back to my earlier point about them not really engaging with technological issues, no, it's just beyond them to even realise that that could be something they could do.
Because there's two elements to that. There's the kind of preservation of the information, the data, and then there's the preservation of
the physical, yeah.
Yes, and I kind of wondered how...
No, that I hoped was specifically about the zeros and ones, but it might have been read as being about preserving the physical medium that the digital media are on.
I think if we can maybe just take one or two more questions and comments, and then we'll sort of break for discussion. And yeah. well, repeat the question into the microphone. Is that?
Okay. I'd just like to support what Catherine said particularly, because there is a huge amount of knowledge about information management within the archive sector, as I now know. However, digital preservation is something which is recognised by the National Archives as a real issue and a real skills gap shortage, I think, actually a gap shortage within the archive sector generally. But there is funding to actually address that, and hopefully I think we all ought to be working together on that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. That would be.
Any final comments?
Can I just feed in something that I think Julian would have said if he'd been here, because I know some of the points that he was intending to make. And I think one of the issues, and it comes back to, again, what are sort of the key definitions of some of these issues and where we learn from. And in the university sector, which is where, Kenny's survey showed that nearly everybody working in archaeology is a graduate, they've come through that route. The thing that defines at that level what should be taught is the subject benchmark for archaeology, which is put together through QAA and is just being revised at the moment. And if you look at that document, there are several mentions of information and information management and data use and data understanding and all those things. I don't think there's any mention of archiving specifically. But that shows that within the higher education sector, there is definitely a recognition of the fact that they have a role, partly because of the transferable skills that it then transfers to undergraduates and postgraduates, but also just because that's the subject matter that we're dealing with, and it's such a crucial issue for us. But of course, one of the challenges is where in somebody's higher education career those things get taught, and by whom. And one of the things that I think Julian would certainly have drawn attention to is the fact that within the academic community, there aren't necessarily always within each department the people with the skills themselves to pass on to the next generation. And so this idea, again, of some sort of partnership where people who do have some understanding of those issues, perhaps not always the chief executives, should be working in collaboration with academic sector to actually make sure that the next generation that are coming through, the graduates, do have access to some of that skills and understanding, can develop that for themselves. But there is a basis for that, at least within the subject benchmark, and that's perhaps worth just referencing and being something we can build on in the discussion.
Perhaps somebody could tweet a link or post something on the Ether pads. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Two questions from the Ether pads.
Oh yes, please. If you could, if the microphone could come over to the.
So these are from Alistair Galt, and he asked, first of all, how does someone like me, who is working towards an MSc in archaeological computing, get to those groups and organisations who have these skills shortages? I know that sounds self-defeatist, but I've been promoting my GIS and CAD abilities and digital preservation. Am I doing something wrong?
I would say, hi Alistair. To get to those organisations have recognised that they have a shortage by saying that we only know they say they have a shortage because they say they try to get people in. So they must be advertising or recruiting by some mechanism. So I don't think there is a magic button to press there. But it is, I hope, helpful to him to be aware that this means that organisations do want to bring in outside help in these areas.
And secondly, again from him, to both of you, mentioned that there's no way of presenting your work to other sectors. There are lots of online ways of presenting our work, such as academia.edu, LinkedIn. Is it just a case of not talking to sectors or archaeology not being proactive enough, or should it be truly up to the individual to find out for themselves how to promote themselves?
Well, if I could just chip in first, certainly I'm an enormous fan of both LinkedIn and academia.edu. Part of the solution to this is for us each to take some responsibility for our development and tell people about it. You know, I think Victoria mentioned earlier that we're a bit English about talking about money. Well, let's be a bit less English about talking about our own skills as well. So, by all means.
I've nothing further to add.
Okay. Was there any further questions? I think, Kenny, you had another point you wanted to make.
Okay, it was, yes, thanks Ed for talking about the NVQ and the NOS. My earlier bloated version of my presentation had a lot more about training frameworks in it, which did also mention the QAA benchmark. Thank you, Mike, for talking about that. As a quick question for the audience in the room, who has an NVQ in archaeological practice here? Okay. Excellent. So is that 3.5? Does that mean you're a candidate at the moment?
I did a workplace learning bursary, and then kind of my job took over, and I ended up in Norfolk. The person who's going to discuss me, there is nothing.
We've all had that problem. Yeah.
I'm not being fair to the internet now. But basically, we were having trouble getting someone out to assess me. So, and especially now, my career's progressed to the point where, I need to collate it all and get this NVQ. And as you're saying, it's the support basically. Now that I'm back in there and I'm a member of the IFA, and now, within easy access of people who can assess me, including Tara, my colleague, I just need to sit down there and actually compile my evidence to actually submit for the NVQ, which for me would be, I think, information management.
Kenny, you...
Okay. Well, then that's important, and following on from that, and so that suggests, Tara, how many of your people, or how many candidates are there out there that you know about?
In terms of our bursary scheme, we've got 51 individuals who have been through or are completing their training at the moment, and all have been signed up for the NVQ.
Right. Okay, now this is important because I'm biased. I really like that qualification. I don't hold it, but I was involved in the development of it. It is a good thing in all the ways that Ed described. It has not been taken up. It has not been taken up nearly widely enough. Those of you that have it are in a very select group. A year ago, IFA had 35 people had received that qualification through IFA as an assessment centre. 2 had received it through V&A Museum, which was the only other assessment centre for that qualification. The Skills Funding Agency is the body in England that gives out money to support candidates doing qualifications that are above the level of any qualifications they already have. So it's a level 3 qualification, so basically anyone who is a graduate is already got a qualification on the QCF at a higher level. Skills Funding Agency withdrew funding support for this qualification, which was extended on appeal, but that extension ends in July, and as far as I know, no one has ever accessed SFA money to support doing the qualification. And furthermore, I'm looking at the Ofqual website right here. Ofqual says that the operational end date for the qualification is 31st July 2014. That suggests at that point no new candidates will be able to join that qualification, and that the certification end date is 31st December 2015. So you've got to finish that. Where's she gone? You've got to finish over there. You've got to finish getting in all that evidence. The qualification just hasn't been picked up enough, and EDI, who were the awarding body, remember, IFA was an assessment centre, EDI is actually the awarding body. EDI has been taken over by Pearson, who are bigger educational publishers. EDI have taken over. EDI, in a rather surprising move that I learned about from a person at EDI in a meeting about a different qualification, Pearson are getting rid of all their cultural qualifications. They don't see them as producing the money. They don't want to run them anymore. The qualification, as it stands, is on its last legs. It's a pity that there isn't anyone from IFA here to speak about this from an assessment centre's perspective. That doesn't mean that candidates right now won't get their qualification. It means that very soon it will be difficult for people to start doing the qualification. The good news about it is that employers really value it. The results from the LMI survey asked employers what they think about the qualification, and they would happily support people to go through it. but not enough people have gone through, and it ends with a whimper. I think this is the end of this, and IFA hasn't been saying anything in public about this. To badmouth my former employer. No, my respected professional association.
I think there is just one point that I don't think it's quite in its death nails. There is a positive side to it. Although the Pearson Group it looks like they're going to get rid of their cultural heritage portfolio, it does look likely, and I believe Kate Geary from the IFA has been discussing this, that an alternative provider will pick up that portfolio. So although we're in a period of uncertainty, I don't think it's quite the death nails yet.
Well, that good, and thank you. And I have heard that as well, and I've heard it is Scottish Qualifications Authority that would like to pick up being the awarding body, but I haven't heard that actually happening yet. But I know there's possibilities.
Another aspect of this which might be worth bearing in mind is that the NVQ qualification now is being evolved into what's the qualifications credit framework.
Yes, it's on the
small.
QCF.
These are sort of smaller, easier to manage, or bite-sized qualifications.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity, rather than having to sign up for what might be quite an extended period of professional development, you may be able to do either a shorter or more targeted qualification. Yeah. So that it's a moment of change, which could be a moment of opportunity.
And there's nothing to stop the National Occupational Standard still being used, as you described, to write job descriptions and the like. And the idea of little bite-sized qualifications. Hey, an organisation can create a private qualification. It doesn't get onto the QCF, it can't get any public money, but you can design your own qualification based on the NOS. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to use these things. The ICON Conservation Technician qualification, the CTQ, which is a very respected and NOS-based qualification, it's not there on the big framework, but it still runs and works as a good qualification. So we can keep doing things. It just will drop off the national, the UK framework.
Can I just, and then I think we might have to move on to the discussions, but basically the idea of this kind of bite-sized qualification and trying to tailor qualifications to, I work full-time. I'm also a bit daft in the fact that I'm doing a half-time PhD as well, and various other things. Just life takes over, and I think it's really important that you can, you don't miss out like I did, and then move on a few years and think, well, I've moved on since then, and my evidence to submit for the MBQ has changed. And then you kind of need the support to kind of come back to it and think, well, should I be applying for something at a higher level? Now that, I'm not at the start of my career, I'm kind of a few years into it now. And I think, this idea of tailoring it and also having partners and, fitting it in basically with people's work and people's lives would be really useful. So, thank you.
Well, I think if I could just draw the sort of forum discussion to a close and move us into the round the table discussions. These are the questions that you have in front of us, though, as I invited you earlier on, do feel free to choose your own questions as well. I'd like to thank Kenny for his contribution and input. And I think the only other announcement is that we finish at 1:15, is that correct? And so let's talk until then. So thank you, everybody.
What are